Let's fill out an electoral college map for what currently looks like the most likely 2028 presidential election matchup, Vice President J.D. Vance versus California Governor Gavin Newsom. And when I say most likely, I'm referring to the prediction market odds, which currently give Vance a 42% chance of securing the Republican nomination and Newsom a 14% shot on the Democratic side. That tells us two things. First, that Vance is clearly the GOP frontrunner, and second, that the Democratic field remains wide open, with no contender even cracking a 1 in 10 chance. Still, let's start with the foundational states Democrats are expected to carry regardless of who ultimately wins the nomination. The so-called Pacific Coast Blue Wall, Washington, Oregon, Newsom's home state of California, and Hawaii will almost certainly stay in Democratic hands. Alongside those, you can add Colorado, Illinois, and much of the Northeast, including Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Delaware, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Maine's 1st Congressional District. With the exception of Colorado, all of these states have voted Democratic in each of the last 9 presidential elections. Colorado, meanwhile, has moved further to the left than almost any other state since the dawn of the Trump era. Back in 2016, Hillary Clinton carried it by 5 points. In 2024, Kamala Harris won it by 11. Republicans, meanwhile, are almost certain to hold Alaska, Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, Nebraska's statewide vote, plus its 3rd congressional district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and nearly the entirety of the Deep South, excluding the battlegrounds of Georgia and North Carolina. In the Midwest, Iowa, Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, Vance's home state of Ohio, and West Virginia are also solidly red, with the exceptions of Ohio, Indiana, and Iowa, and then of course Florida. These states have all gone Republican in 7 consecutive presidential races. Florida, Iowa, and Ohio were battlegrounds as recently as 2016, but have since shifted decisively toward Republicans, especially Florida, which has moved further right than any other state in the country throughout the Trump era. Altogether, these solid red states provide Vice President Vance with a strong foundation of 217 electoral votes in the race to 270. Governor Newsom, on the other hand, starts with a smaller base of 177. When assessing each candidate's strengths and vulnerabilities, the prevailing narrative around J.D. Vance is that he's a sharp messenger and a strong orator looking to carry the Trump agenda into a new generation. I'd rate him as a slightly above-average general election candidate, though there's always the risk that he fails to replicate Trump's unique appeal. His odd demeanor and personality could also turn off swing voters who aren't already aligned with the Republican base. Gavin Newsom is also widely viewed as one of the most effective communicators in the Democratic Party. His challenge will be whether he can credibly defend his leadership in California, which continues to suffer from poor national perception, and whether he can overcome perceptions of slickness and elitism that have dogged his personal image. And now, with those starting positions established, we turn to the early battlegrounds of the 2028 cycle. This group includes Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New Hampshire, the statewide vote in Maine, as well as the 2nd Congressional District in Maine and in Nebraska, along with its 1st, and of course, the pivotal Rust Belt trio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Altogether, these 13 states and districts account for 144 electoral votes, the decisive tranche that will ultimately determine who wins the presidency. Now, you could certainly make a case for expanding this list to include Texas or even Ohio. Joe Biden came within 6 points of flipping Texas as recently as 2020. While the state swung sharply back toward Republicans in 2024, Democrats remained competitive down ballot. Each of the last 3 U.S. Senate races there were decided by single digits. That suggests the state is not entirely out of reach, particularly in the right political climate or with the right candidate. Ohio tells a similar story. Yes, it's moved right in recent cycles, but prior to 2024, the previous 8 presidential contests in the Buckeye State were all decided by less than 10 points. 4 of the last 5 Senate races there were tight as well, so while Ohio may appear solid red on the surface, its underlying competitiveness remains, and with the right national wins, it could absolutely return to battleground status. At the same time, a few traditional Democratic strongholds are trending in the opposite direction. Illinois and New York, long considered blue bedrocks, have both shifted noticeably to the right in recent years. While they remain solidly Democratic for now, it's not far-fetched to imagine them drifting into lean blue territory within the next decade, much like New Jersey already has. Take Illinois, for example. Biden carried the state by 17 points in 2020, but that margin shrank to 11 points for Kamala Harris in 2024, a swing of 6 points. New York saw an even more dramatic shift from Biden's 23-point win in 2020 to just a 12.5 margin for Harris in 2024. In fact, New York had the largest swing of any state between those two elections. So what's driving these shifts? It primarily comes down to Trump's unexpected gains among minority voters, particularly in and around the cities of New York City and Chicago. Add to that poor Democratic turnout, and it makes sense why the margin shrank. Still, despite these clear trends, both New York and Illinois remain strongly Democratic for now. The pace of change is simply not fast enough to put them in play for Vance or whoever Republicans nominate come 2028. Nevertheless, let's focus on these 13 states now, starting with those that are likely to go to one candidate, loosely defined as those where one party holds a clear advantage, but where an upset is possible. For Newsom, 3 of the most likely holds in 2028 are Maine's statewide vote, Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, and then Minnesota, which, perhaps surprisingly, holds the longest active Democratic winning streak in presidential elections at 13. I say surprisingly, given how competitive Minnesota often is. 6 of the last 7 presidential races there have been decided by single digits. The closest Republicans came to breaking through was in 2016, when Donald Trump finished just a point and a half behind Hillary Clinton. Since then, Democrats have held their ground. Joe Biden carried the state by 7 points in 2020, and Kamala Harris held it by 4 in 2024. So while Minnesota consistently produces tight margins, the underlying lean remains Democratic. In fact, the state saw one of the smallest GOP shifts in the country between 2020 and 2024. If the 2028 environment proves no worse for Democrats than the last cycle, they should be well positioned to extend their streak. As for Nebraska's 2nd district, it's voted for Democrats in back-to-back cycles, going from Biden +7 to Harris +5. Considering the national environments in both elections, the district actually became bluer in 2024, voting 6 points to the left of the country. Similarly, in Maine, it went from Biden +9 to Harris +7, but voted further to the left of the country in 2024. Also, in the likely Newsom column is New Mexico. Like Minnesota, it's frequently competitive. 9 of the last 10 presidential elections there have been decided by less than 12 points. In 2024, Kamala Harris carried the state by just 6 points, and it ranked in the top half of all states for Republican gains between 2020 and 2024. That's not especially surprising. New Mexico is the most Hispanic state in the country and has the lowest percentage of college-educated residents among states Harris won in 2024. And that matters because 2 of the clearest political realignments of the past decade have been college-educated voters moving left and Hispanic voters drifting right. Still, it would likely take at least another 2 cycles before Republicans have a serious shot at flipping New Mexico in a presidential race. Rounding out the list of likely Democratic states are Virginia and New Jersey. Coincidentally, the 2 states holding marquee races for governor later this year. Both contests are open seat races with no incumbent on the ballot, making them the first meaningful test of President Trump's second-term popularity at the state level. In 2024, Kamala Harris carried Virginia by 5.8% and New Jersey by 5.9%, both slimmer margins than Joe Biden's double-digit wins in 2020. Even so, Democrats are currently favored in both gubernatorial contests. In Virginia, Democratic nominee Abigail Spanberger has consistently led Republican nominee Winsome Earl-Sears in the polls. And with the primaries now over, we finally have the first general election polling in New Jersey that shows Democratic nominee Mikey Sherrill leading Republican nominee Jack Ciattarelli. The margins in these races will be key indicators. There's reason to believe Virginia could shift further left, especially given the wave of federal worker layoffs under the Trump administration in recent months. Many of those workers live and vote in Northern Virginia. New Jersey may also swing back toward Democrats, as much of the state's dramatic shift right in 2024 could simply be attributed to poor Democratic turnout. These races will serve as a litmus test for the statewide environments. If Democrats win each by margins closer to 10 points, they'll be in solid shape heading into 2028. But if either slips closer to a 5 points or below margin, it will add to the growing list of warning signs for the party in the post-Biden era. Now turning to the Vance column, there actually aren't any full states that fit neatly into the likely red category this cycle. Instead, the only contest that truly qualifies is the race in Maine's 2nd congressional district. Donald Trump carried this ultra-rural northern district by margins ranging from 7 to 10 points. Still, it's been held by Democrat Jared Golden in the U.S. House since 2019, showing a degree of split-ticket behavior that's kept the area more competitive than its presidential results suggest. I just realized I forgot about Nebraska's 1st district, which is an even more intriguing case. It was the only constituency in the entire country where Kamala Harris outperformed Joe Biden's 2020 margin. On the surface, the raw shift from Trump plus 15 in 2020 to Trump plus 13 in 2024 looks modest. But nationally, the GOP gained more than 6 points over that stretch. So relative to the country, Nebraska 0-1 actually moved about 8 points to the left. If a similar shift happens again in 2028, Newsom could plausibly carry the district with a 4-point national popular vote win. The driver is clear. Democrats keep gaining ground among white, college-educated voters. If this district were a state, it would rank in the top 15 for college degree attainment, a demographic that has become increasingly central to the Democratic coalition. Again, you could also make the case that Ohio or Texas will enter single-digit territory in 2028, particularly if Democrats nominate a strong candidate. But as things stand now, they remain safely in the Republican column. With those latest projections locked in, Newsom now holds a narrow edge in the Electoral College, 222 to 219 over Vance, and that leaves just 8 battleground states still outstanding. Donald Trump carried all but one of them in 2024, the exception being New Hampshire, which hasn't voted Republican since 2004, but it's no stranger to tight margins. In fact, 2 of the last 3 presidential elections there were decided by less than 3 points. Still, barring a major shift, Newsom will be favored to hold on here in 2028. That brings us to the core 7, the same 7 states that dominated the campaign trail in 2024. Trump and Harris spent over 90% of their combined campaign funds here alone. And if you set Arizona aside, the other 6 were all decided by 3 points or less. The electoral math from here is as straightforward as it is familiar. If Newsom sweeps the Rust Belt trio of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, he would hit exactly 270 electoral votes. That's the ballgame, just as it has been in each of the last 3 presidential elections. Remember, Hillary Clinton lost all 3 in 2016, and with them, the presidency. Joe Biden flipped all 3 in 2020 to defeat Trump. Then in 2024, Trump won them back narrowly to deny Kamala Harris a term in the Oval Office. In every case, those 3 states alone decided the presidency. So it's not premature to say the road to the White House in 2028 may once again run straight through Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. This dynamic will no doubt shape the 2028 Democratic primary, and possibly the Republican one too. unless J.D. Vance locks up the nomination early. For Democrats, it could become the defining argument for candidates like Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro or Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer over someone like Newsom. As popular incumbents who've already won in two of the most pivotal states on the map, they'll have a compelling case when it comes to electability, the same argument that helped power Joe Biden to the nomination in 2020. In a neutral political environment, the math shows just how precarious this trio is for Democrats. According to my own partisan voting index, which averages the last 4 presidential margins and adjusts for the national popular votes, all 3 states tilt slightly Republican. Michigan is the most favorable for Democrats at R plus 0.6, followed by Wisconsin at R plus 1.0, and Pennsylvania at R plus 1.4. In other words, if the national vote in 2028 were tied, Republicans would be expected to carry all 3, albeit narrowly. That still makes them the least Republican-leaning of the 7 major battlegrounds. Nevada clocks in at R plus 1.5, Georgia at R plus 2.5, North Carolina at R plus 3.4, and Arizona at R plus 4.3. But raw averages only tell part of the story. I've also built a trend and demographic-adjusted PVI, factoring in the direction of each state's political evolution and key voter demographics. Using this model, Wisconsin comes out as the least Republican-leaning state at just R plus 0.9, followed by Michigan, Pennsylvania, and then Georgia, reflecting the growing Democratic strength in metro Atlanta and the state's rapidly diversifying electorate. Ultimately, the bottom line, though, is that these Rust Belt states are very likely to be core battlegrounds in 2028. They've voted in unison in every presidential election over the last 40 years, and odds are they'll do so again. If the election were held this November, I'd expect all 3 to tilt Democratic. That's largely because President Trump statistically remains the least popular president in modern history. His net approval rating sits at negative 14%, worse than it was at this point in his first term and more than 20 points lower than where Joe Biden stood in June of his first year in office. That disapproval has a clear source. The economy is polling as the most important issue among voters at the highest rate recorded since The Economist began tracking it in 2017. That spike may reflect growing frustration with Trump's recent tariff announcements, as well as broader uncertainty surrounding his foreign policy in the Middle East. And when it comes to economic perception, no region is more sensitive than the Rust Belt, especially these 3 swing states. They were the ones that powered Trump to his first victory in 2016, only to turn against him 4 years later and deny him a second term. If the next presidential election took place this fall, the data suggests these states would again swing away from Republicans. That said, we're evaluating the 2028 map, and here I think Vance might be a relatively strong matchup against Newsom in this region. There's a real chance a segment of Rust Belt swing voters sees Newsom as a coastal elite, disconnected from working-class concerns. Vance, by contrast, raised in Appalachian, Ohio, and molded by its economic realities, may come across as far more relatable in the eyes of voters across Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. For that reason, I'd give him a slight edge in Pennsylvania, the most fundamentally Republican of the 3, while Michigan and Wisconsin go in the toss-up column for now. You'll have to watch until the end of the video to see my off-the-cuff predictions. Moving on now, I do think Vance will retain the upper hand in both Nevada and Arizona. While Kamala Harris generally performed better in battleground states than elsewhere, these 2 were exceptions. Both states shifted about 5.5 points toward Trump between 2020 and 2024. That was the sharpest movement among the closely contested states. Unless Democrats decide to nominate someone with unique regional appeal, like Arizona Senators Mark Kelly or Ruben Gallego, they'll enter 2028 as underdogs in these key Southwest battlegrounds, regardless of the economic environment. That brings us to the southeastern battlegrounds, Georgia and North Carolina. While both states backed Donald Trump in 2024 by margins of 2 points in Georgia and 3 in North Carolina, they nonetheless continued to trend left relative to the national vote. In 2020, Georgia voted 4.3 points to the right of Joe Biden's national popular vote margin of 4.5 points. North Carolina was even further right, nearly 6 points redder than the country overall. But in 2024, those gaps narrowed significantly. Georgia voted less than a full point to the right of the national average, and North Carolina by less than 2. That relative shift is part of a longer-term trajectory, fueled by gradual but meaningful demographic change. Both states are seeing steady growth in large, diverse urban areas, Atlanta, Charlotte, the Research Triangle, as well as an influx of college-educated transplants from traditionally Democratic strongholds in the Northeast and West Coast. These trends haven't yet flipped North Carolina blue, but they're clearly making both states more competitive with each cycle. By 2028, it's likely that Democrats will prioritize Georgia and North Carolina over Arizona and Nevada. Not only do they offer more electoral votes, but they're also likely to be more favorable to the party by then. So, for the purposes of this video, where we're assuming, at worst, a neutral environment for Democrats, Georgia is effectively a toss-up, while North Carolina likely still maintains a slight Republican tilt. That just about wraps it up for this one. To be clear, most of these core swing states are effectively toss-ups at this point. There's just so much uncertainty when it comes to the economy, the candidates, and all the unpredictable events that will inevitably happen over the next 3 years. Honestly, I wouldn't give either party better than a 50-50 shot at the presidency right now. But as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this map. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Plus, if you've got any ideas for future videos or topics, I'm all ears. That's it for today's video. Big shout out to my channel members listed in the description below. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Check out more of my videos right here, and as always, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.